And sooner or later, Nana, people have to grow up.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to the channel if this is your first time. This is part 20 in my deep dive into the original series of the Twilight Zone. So the first iteration of the Twilight Zone, the classic 1959 to 1964 5-season Twilight Zone. And I'm going through every single episode. And I'm now at the end of season 4. So this is the last 6 episodes of season 4. Season 4 is very different in character because they decided to double the length of the episodes. So with the adverts as well, they're an hour long, which is a long time for a show like the Twilight Zone. And some of the stories suffered, a lot of the stories suffered from the length of time that they, their running time. So it's interesting because some didn't. Some managed to sort of still be compelling and be, exactly right length, even though they're double length. But the thing of the Twilight Zone, the nature of the stories, they tend to be stories that are justified as a 25-minute thing. The stories work with the beginning, middle, and end running for that long. So in this last little batch, there are a couple of episodes that really work from that length, and then some that are just too long. Okay, so the last 6. The first one is called The New Exhibit. Okay, so the new exhibit starts with this opening narration. Martin Lombard Senescu, a gentleman, the dedicated curator of Murderers Row in Ferguson's Wax Museum. He ponders the reasons why ordinary men are driven to commit mass murder. What Mr. Senescu does not know is that the groundwork has already been laid for his own special kind of madness and torment, found only in the Twilight Zone. And that's credited to Charles Beaumont, who's written a lot of episodes of the Twilight Zone, but it was actually written by Jerry Soule. So it was ghost written by Jerry Soule, but because it was credited on screen by Charles Beaumont. And I think this is a really good episode. So this is one where Martin Balsam, who's making his second appearance on the Twilight Zone after the 60mm shrine back in the first season. It's his second appearance. He plays a really creepy and obsessive wax museum curator. So this is someone who's in charge of a small part of a wax museum called Murderers Row. And it features like Jack the Ripper and a few other famous murderers in wax form. And basically Ferguson, the guy who runs it, needs to sell it off. And he tells Martin Balsam's character, called Martin, that he's selling it off. And Martin buys the Murderers Row wax exhibits off him and keeps them in his basement. And this obsession becomes absolute. And his wife is fed up with it, and she gets advice from her brother that she needs to just ruin the wax models, and it all goes wrong. Shades of Little Shop of Horrors in the ensuing death scenes, but it's I think it's a really good episode. It's nice the way it ends as well. It ends with in a sort of like cautionary manner, if you like. But yeah, it's a good episode. So I like the new exhibit, and worth checking out, even if you're a little bit unsure about checking out the season 4 ones because of the length of time. I think this one works despite that. So the next one is Of Late I Think of Cliffordville. And Of Late I Think of Cliffordville begins with this opening narration. Witness a murder. The killer is Mr. William Feathersmith, a robber baron whose body composition is made up of a refrigeration plant covered by thick skin. In a moment, Mr. Feathersmith will proceed on his daily course of conquest and calumny with yet another business dealing. But this one will be one of those bizarre transactions that take place in an odd marketplace known as The Twilight Zone. So, of late, I think of Cliffordville is written by Rod Serling, based on a short story called Blind Alley by Malcolm Jameson. And I actually found this episode quite irritating. So, I wouldn't use that word at all, really, for the Twilight Zone. This is the first time I've used that word. I didn't like some episodes, but this I found actually irritating. And really, it's because of the main actor. The guy playing the main actor, I found him really irritating. It was a really strange performance. It was clearly quite a false performance. He was putting on a performance. It wasn't a natural performance, but it was also quite irritating. So this is an actor called Albert Salmi, and he was playing this main character who is like a very successful tycoon who is a little bit jaded in his later life and wants to go back to Cliffordville, where he's got this sort of romantic, nostalgic sense of his past and where it all came from. And basically, when he goes back there, well, he strikes a deal with the devil. And the devil is played brilliantly by Julie Newmar. So, obviously, Julie Newmar is very famous as being Catwoman in the 70s Batman series. So, it's wonderful to see a really good performance from Julie Newmar. And she kind of makes him a deal and basically tricks him, but it takes ages to get there, and all the time you're waiting to get this big conclusion, you have to put up with this really irritating performance. So yeah, I wouldn't normally use that word for such a incredible series, but yeah, this one I found really hard going, and Julie Newmar wasn't enough to save it. And I think the plot was kind of predictable in some ways as well. So yeah, I just didn't think it was a very strong episode at all. Okay, so the next one is The Incredible World of Horace Ford. And The Incredible World of Horace Ford begins with this opening narration. Mr. Horace Ford, who has a preoccupation with another time, a time of childhood, a time of growing up, a time of street games, stickball, and hide-and-go-seek. He has a reluctance to go check out a mirror and see the nature of his image, proof positive that the time he dwells in has already passed him by. But in a moment or two, he'll discover that mechanical toys and memories and daydreaming and wishful thinking and all manner of odd and special events can lead into a special province, uncharted and unmapped, a country of both shadow and substance known as the Twilight Zone. This was a completely different situation. This was much more interesting. The performance at the center of it was absolutely brilliant. Really, really good performance. But it's written by Reginald Rose, and I don't know Reginald Rose as a name as far as a writer goes, but this is his first appearance on the Twilight Zone, and he wrote this wonderful episode that is put to the screen so brilliantly by Pat Hingle. Pat Hingle actually eventually appears in the Tim Burton Batman, so another Batman link there, which is funny. But he's quite an old man by the time he's in that. But he's a much younger man here, and he plays a very childlike character. He's a full-grown man. He's in his 30s, but he acts like a child. And he keeps going on about when he was like 10 and these different memories he's got from when he's 10, and his wife has to put up with it. His mother is a really interestingly played character as well. I mean, all three of them are interesting performances. But the mother is clearly a very doting mother who has probably enabled this kind of behaviour, but you also get the sense that he can't help it, that this character is childlike at its core. It's not like a tendency, it's possibly like a special educational needs kind of situation. It's difficult to say because you wouldn't have seen it like that in those days, but it seems to be that kind of thing. And he eventually does insist on going back to his childhood haunt where he has this memory, and he kind of comes face to face with his bullies again. It's a really strange episode, really interesting episode, definitely worth a look, and it's quite unique, I think. So I think the one thing about the Twilight Zone, it's always got the potential to give you something new that you haven't seen before, and I think that's definitely true for this one. So The Incredible World of Horace Ford, I think it's a really successful episode that justifies its length and has also got this great performance at the centre of it by Pat Hingle. So check that one out if you're interested. Okay, so the next one is another really good one called On Thursday We Leave for Home. And this is one I've never forgotten. I've seen it a few times, but it really plays on your mind. I think it's a really it's a very poignant episode. And the fantastic episode On Thursday We Leave for Home starts with this opening narration. This is William Benteen, who officiates on a disintegrating outpost in space. The people are a remnant society who left the Earth looking for a millennium, a place without war, without jeopardy, without fear, and what they found was a lonely, barren place whose only industry was survival. And this is what they've done for 3 decades, survive, until the memory of the Earth they came from has become an indistinct and shadowed recollection of another time and another place. 1 month ago, a signal from Earth announced that a ship would be coming to pick them up and take them home. In just a moment, we'll hear more of that ship, more of that home, and what it takes out of mind and body to reach it. This is the Twilight Zone. I was going to say almost poetic. I don't think that's true. I think it's a silly term to use. But it's a very poignant episode because it tells you, it explores a very deep and interesting point about the way we work. So basically, James Whitmore plays a guy called Captain Benteen, and he's a man that's got this new life leading a group of people stranded on another planet. And as a rescue becomes imminent, he realizes that this new life will be taken away from him. And his authority is going to be taken away from him, his purpose, and he's trying to kind of put people off going on this rescue. And it's just so brilliantly written, and it's very realistically written. And it's just a really good way of exploring what we're like as we desperately cling to power, a feeling of importance. If we're in a situation where we feel like we matter, we don't want that to go away. But he really manipulates the situation, or tries to manipulate the situation, because he really can't stand the idea of going back to an ordinary life and not being important again. So that's a really good episode, really, really good. It's one of my favourite episodes. So On Thursday We Leave for Home, fantastic episode, written by Rod Serling. So that's worth saying. I hadn't said that. Written by Rod Serling. Okay, so the next one is called Passage on the Lady Anne. And Passage on the Lady Anne begins with this opening narration. Portrait of a honeymoon couple getting ready for a journey, with a difference. These newlyweds have been married for 6 years, and they're not taking this honeymoon to start their life, but rather to save it. Or so Eileen Ransom thinks. She doesn't know why she insisted on the ship for this voyage, except that it would give them some time, that she'd never been on one before, certainly never one like Lady Anne. The tickets read New York to Southampton, but this old liner is going somewhere else. Its destination, the Twilight Zone. And this one is also written by Charles Beaumont, and it was the last script he wrote for the Twilight Zone. So sadly, Charles Beaumont died very young. So he made a really significant impression on the world of speculative fiction with his work on the Twilight Zone and his work in short stories. But sadly, he died very young. And he wrote this really odd story, Passage on the Lady Anne, about this couple that go on this cruise liner, and they're almost, well, they get these people try and persuade them to get off it and not go on this journey, on this cruise. And they're insisting, no, we want to go on this cruise. Why are you stopping us from going on this cruise? And then they get on the boat and they realise that everybody's really old and they think it's a bit weird, but they just carry on. And ultimately what happens is they realise that this boat, the reason why there were attempts to put them off going on there, is this boat is on its way to the afterlife. So it sort of plays out from there. So I'm not going to tell you exactly how it ends, but it's quite long. It's a really interesting episode. It's got Wilfred Hyde-White in it, who makes a really big impression on the episode. He does a great performance, and it's got this sort of Englishness about it because there's lots of that kind of acting happening. But yeah, it's I don't know. It's too long. It's too much of a one-note episode, so I found it quite disappointing, quite slow, and there wasn't enough to it really. So in some ways, because Charles Beaumont wrote so many great episodes, it's a bit of a shame that was his last episode. So Passage on the Lady Anne, I'd say, was a bit disappointing. And then the last one in this little batch, and the last one of season 4, is a really unusual one, written by Rod Serling, and that's called The Bard. And The Bard starts with this opening narration. You've just witnessed opportunity, if not knocking, at least scratching plaintively on a closed door. Mr. Julius Moomer, a would-be writer, who if talent came 25 cents a pound, would be worth less than car fare. But in a moment, Mr. Moomer, through the offices of some black magic, is about to embark on a brand new career. And although he may never get a writing credit on the Twilight Zone, he's to become an integral character in it. So now and again, the Twilight Zone do these episodes, which are comedy episodes, and the whole thing is played for laughs. I have a feeling that he was trying to satirize the way that scripts get doctored and changed and updated by somebody else, like producers or people who are in charge of transferring it to the theatre or to film. And it's it's definitely something the writers have to deal with because their work gets bastardized sometimes. They feel like their work, all the heart and soul they put into work is then sort of turned into mush by these people that don't get it. They don't get it. So that's kind of what it explores, but it does it through comedy. So the main part, who's Jack Weston, he plays a writer desperate to get a job, to get a writing job, and he's got all these ideas, and his agent's like, your ideas are really not very interesting. I don't want to give you this green light that you keep asking for. And he basically gives him one last chance, and he needs to sort of write something about black magic. And Jack Weston's character sort of takes the opportunity, takes the inspiration to actually work with black magic, and conjures up William Shakespeare. So he conjures up the spirit of William Shakespeare, and William Shakespeare helps him to write very Shakespearean material for a new play. And it goes down a treat, and blah, 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 blah. In the midst of all this, you've got this one moment when they're rehearsing the play where you get a very young Burt Reynolds doing a satirical mocking of Marlon Brando. He looks and sounds exactly like him. It's very obvious that it's him because he's also making references to the things that Marlon Brando was in. And it's so obviously taking the piss out of Marlon Brando. And that's a really interesting thing to see on the Twilight Zone. It's just a really weird thing to see, but it's funny. And it's just nice to see young Burt Reynolds. I've always thought Burt Reynolds was kind of an underrated actor, really, because I think when he's had to do serious acting, he's been amazing. So he clearly got famous over Smokey and the Bandit and all that sort of stuff, which doesn't really necessarily ask for much acting chops. But he's brilliant when he gets given the material. So anyway, he's doing this part in this episode that's very clearly taking the piss out of Marlon Brando, which is really funny. So yeah, the episode is enjoyable. It's definitely enjoyable, and Jack Weston's performance is very memorable and compelling. The Shakespearean aspect of it's funny as well, and the guy playing Shakespeare is definitely, I think his name's John Williams. He's definitely, playing it for laughs, and it works really well. And then you've just got this sort of punchline kind of ending as well. So it's definitely one that was done for comedy, and it is definitely successful. So yeah, The Bard was a good one. I wouldn't say it was one of the best ones, but it was good. It was a lot of fun, and it's fine that that's how it ended season 4. So that is the end of season 4 of the Twilight Zone in these deep dive episodes that I'm doing on here. And we're back on season 5. So the next one you'll watch, part 21, will be season 5. So the episodes will be shorter, and there are some absolute crackers in season 5. So even though it's the last season, sometimes with these programs, with these classic programs, by the time it gets to the end, it's waning a little bit. There are some really good episodes to come. So yeah, more to look forward to. But if you've been watching all of these episodes, I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed looking at it in this much detail. I do think it's a really, really, really special series. There's nothing like it, really. And I've enjoyed going into this much detail. So yeah, thanks for watching. Stay curious, everybody.
Paint me a picture of what it's like to be you. Sit up on your high chair.